Hello, we are on air now. Nas, nas.
Without further ado, this House calls the Prime Minister to the floor. You're here.
Hello, uh, Zaid bhai.
What's up?
Hello.
Hello.
Hear you. We can hear you.
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আমাকে টাইম করো হ্যাঁ
Yeah, our timer on আছে. Don't worry about it. Ready to begin when you are.
okay starting in 3, 2, 1. The opening government comes to you with the team line that security of its civilians is the most important thing and trumps all other aspects of this debate. We think that prioritizing and ensuring the security of every single civilian on the ground is what is a moral duty of the government and is something that the civilians trust the government to do and pays taxes for, which is why we believe that this eye in the sky aerial surveilling will be done by the government only, or the opposition opening government stands for only the government to do this. So this will be a state funded uh, venture, and the government will be the one conducting these surveillance programs. The purpose of these surveillance programs will be strictly for security purposes. We believe that for two reasons. Firstly, because the urban, I mean, this aerial surveillance is firstly going to be legitimate and is secondly going to be effective. And for both these reasons, we think this any secure surveillance venture done will strictly be because of civilian security purposes. If private entities come forward, if private entities carry out these ventures, then we will not be in support of those particular ventures. So why do we think that the government is the best person or is the best entity to carry out these ventures? We think that the government is the most accountable body in the society, and we think that it is much easier to verify the motives of the government, and the government does have like an incentive to protect its civilians, and any mishap that occurs during these surveillances, like any accidents or any mishap, can be directly linked to the government. And we believe that because of this unique accountability that exists only with the government should be the one to do this. So what will like so this aerial surveilling can be done by like a variety of methods. It can be done by like helicopters or drones or like planes and whatnot. And the the way that it will supervise is we believe that supervising roads or mass areas in urban areas where the crime rates are very high is going to be very, very effective. We think that this can happen on like multiple layers, like supervising a large university during a major event, like supervising Dhaka University during using aerial surveilling during the Poila Boishakh, which could have prevented the many rapes that had happened, or mass areas during these events, or supervising roads during nighttime when it is very difficult for patrol officers to do, or supervising large areas of forests that are very secluded but crimes, or like areas with urban areas with large areas of forest, or urban areas that are very congested where patrol officers cannot always go. We think that these are the places that uh, should be surveyed. So in this where characterization comes in, where in urban areas that have a lot of crimes going on, we think that these tend to be more often than not developing areas where patrolling and other law enforcement services are less in number or are weak. So we think that these urban areas tend to lack urban planning, are more congested, and it is very difficult for patrol officers on foot to patrol every single road or every single alley. And in those scenarios, we think that and like a bird's eye view of the entire neighborhood or the entire city is going to be very effective in like uh, reducing crime, which at the end of the day is the objective from
POI,
opening government. Yes, sir.
will surveillance change the lack of law enforcement despite you having an eye on individuals?
Oh, so which is that was something that I was going to talk about in the part where I was going to talk about how it's effective. But anyway, so we think that the way that this is going to work is that this is going to be a tool that police officers on the ground are going to use as a means of surveillance. So what does this mean? We think that the way this is going to work is that um, helicopters or drones are going to give information to the police officers on the ground, or are going to give information to the law enforcement agency to help facilitate their investigation or help facilitate any pursuit of and says that is it going to solve the problems in law enforcement agency. We tell you that that is not our burden to prove. Our burden to prove is that the security of these individuals are fulfilled because of our model. And I'm going to show you how in a positive manner. So firstly, the question as to why this is legitimate. I've already touched upon this when I said that the security of these civilians is going to be the most important factor in this debate. We tell you that any issue of the privacy of individuals of when they're walking down the streets is trivial when it is compared to the security of them. We think that if we can prevent a burglary or murder from happening when they're walking down that alley, it's going to be it's going to be tantamount to that person, and we believe that that is reason for which
Last minute.
this motion should pass. And secondly, the issue of why it's going to be effective. Firstly, because information is going to travel much faster because of this model. When, for example, there's going to be a burglary, or that drone or helicopter can very easily identify the burglar and send information like a picture or details about that burglar to the police officers in pursuit on ground, or the information about the vehicle that he's traveling in. So it's going to be much more accurate and faster it's going to facilitate the investigation of these police officers. And then we tell you that the drones and the helicopters are going to be much better able to supervise risky areas, because these urban areas that are very congested and do pose a risk to the patrol officers who are on the ground, who can be attacked. We tell you that this risk is going to be eliminated under our model, where these very risky areas can be patrolled or supervised rather by these drones and helicopters. And then I've already talked to you about how congested areas will be better patrolled. So summarizing, from my speech, you've gotten our model as to why the government should be the one to do this, and why it is strictly going to be done because of security reasons, and how in these urban areas that are that lack urban planning or congested, it is extremely important that we have aerial surveilling. And we've also talked to you about how this is going to be very effective. Thank you. Time up now? Farhan?
7 minutes, 37 seconds.
Okay, so when my second speaker is also going to talk to you about how the trade-offs that we're making in terms of funds or whatnot are going to be worth it, or are the benefits that we're showing are going to outweigh any harms that opposition is going to show.
Debate.
Oh, achha, so thank you. I'm getting the ball. I'm say 8 minutes debate.
BP. So
It's fine. You're farmer and everything. It's fine.
Okay.
You're here. This House accordingly invites the Leader of Opposition to present the negative case.
All right. Hello. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Am I being timed?
Yes.
Oh, just a second. The opening government house gives us a lot of ideas and tells us that, you know what, we're going to solve an issue, but they're not going through the root of the problem, which is a persisting or existing security system within these urban areas at the end of the day. So let's look at what the Prime Minister brings to us, right? So they tell us how these helicopters or aerial surveillances will be government funded. So in my constructive matter, I'll be talking to you about how the costs of these ventures will have a huge impact on the taxpayers, right? So on top of that, they tell us that, you know what, they'll be supervising on and have an aerial view. And as the issue that they put up is that as urban areas have a lot of alleyways, it's very difficult for police officers to get there on time. So to that we say that, you know what, if these urban areas already have very narrow alleyways which are extremely congested, the idea that if you have an aerial view of it, you'll be able to catch every single crime taking place simultaneously and then call down, we don't think that's possible, because we don't think that it will be possible for these drones unless they're of a huge amount, which we don't think will be feasible because of the costs. It won't be possible for these drones to catch every single crime taking place. Furthermore, even if these drones are able to catch every single crime taking place, the ability of these drones to relay that idea to the police officers, and these police officers actually being able to have a decision made, will not occur, simply because of the lack of police officers existing, which the Prime Minister herself agreed to at the end of the day, right? So on top of that, they tell us that, you know what, privacy is not a very huge issue, simply because people's security matters. But at the end of the day, we believe that privacy is something that these people have a right to at the end of the day, that will also be coming up in my constructives, right? So moreover, they talk about how there's going to be a very faster process and details will be sent down to the police officer. We believe that even if this is a very fast process, we believe that the issues will be at the ground level, and the police officers won't really be able to delegate those matters at the end of the day. So moving on to the constructives, right? Today I'll be talking about the idea of how the privacy is hindered, the costs that will be impacting these people, the idea of how racism will be perpetuated, and the collateral damage that will be existing, right? So moving on to the first idea of how the costs will impact these taxpayers, right? So let's understand something. If these urban areas have a security issue, that means the police officers there are underfunded, and the persisting security there, be it CCTV cameras, etc., are underfunded, right? On top of that, when you ask the government to go ahead and put up extra funds for these drones, we believe it's going to have a huge impact on the persisting security system there, right? What does that mean? Meaning that a lot of the funds will be taken away from the current CCTV cameras existing. A lot of the funds will be have to taken away from the police officers. If not that, this money will have to come from the government, from the taxpayers' monies, right? And we believe there's going to be a huge backlash on that. Why? Because we believe that simply because of the existence of drones, the rate of high crimes existing in these urban areas will not decrease. Because let's understand something. Even if you have 5 to 10 drones at the same time, if on the ground level you don't improve the security system, the ability to actually catch criminals is not going to happen, right? So at the end of the day, the solution never comes. So the alternative that we provide to you from our side is that ensure that these the security system within these urban areas are improved, right? And that or add extra CCTV cameras rather than spending on drones which require a high amount of maintenance, right? So for example, if you have a police officer, his skill is not likely to go away within the span of 1 or 2 years, right? But these drones have the ability to have issues like regularly because of all the high-tech technology that you talk about. So the maintenance factors comes in, and the money will be needed to keep on pouring in. So this cost is something that's very high, and we don't believe it's something that's practical for an area with such financial issues already, right? Secondly, moving on to the idea of how racism is going to be persisted. So understand that it's already a very common situation where we see that police brutality occurs and a lot of racist mindsets exist, right? Because we have seen in the cases of Michael Brown and Tamir Rice, where these people were attacked simply because of their skin color. And at the end of the day, what's happening is with a drone or a helicopter, the person controlling it is a single human being, right? It's not, we understand to believe that it's not AI. So as a result, when a single human being is controlling that aircraft, the possibility of that human being taking care of looking at certain areas which are following certain burglars of a certain color is much more likely. What does that mean? As we have already told you, that the possibility of a drone to see every single crime taking place in that area is not feasible, that drone or the operator of the drone is likely to go ahead and look for certain race, for certain people of skin and follow those burglars, right? And at the end of the day, racism will be further persistent. But what's the issue here? You don't have a check and balance system for that drone operator at the end of the day. But in the status quo, with the police system, you do have media attention and you do have check and balance system, right? And lastly, moving on to the idea of how privacy is hindered. But before moving on, any POIs, it's the 6th minute. Okay, fine. So moving on to the idea of how privacy is hindered, right? So understand how people got really scared when Edward Snowden released information of the NHS and how a lot of their private informations were being taken away. So when these people hear that they have a drone that's flying up above them and is on a very daily basis taking pictures of them, people have a higher chance of freaking out. Why is this different from CCTV cameras, right? Simply because a CCTV camera doesn't have the ability to move around and scan certain areas. Because we believe for a drone to be able to do its work properly, it needs to be able to move around and zoom in on the area of the crime scene at the end of the day. So if a drone has that ability, the possibility of these drones going ahead and interfering in the matters of people like hinders the privacy of people at the end of the day. And we believe that is an issue in itself, because we believe that as these people are paying money, it's okay. Last minute. So at the end of the day, the issue here is the privacy is hindered, but we believe because these drones have the ability to go ahead and interfere their lives, and this will be further extended by my second speaker. So basically what have we told to you, right? We don't see how the feasibility idea comes in, because at the end of the day, on the ground level, you don't improve your police officers, the ability of these police officers to suddenly catch more criminals simply because of the existence of drones doesn't take place. The cost factor is going to really have a huge impact on the taxpayers and maybe even cut off from the police's salaries. And as a result, we believe that the police officers should be given more importance, and we are proud to oppose.
Here. Around 7 minutes 40 seconds on my stopwatch.
It was 7:30 on mine. I think there was like a time gap.
I apologize. There was a slight my Google Chrome browser slightly hung for a bit. That's why maybe the stopwatch went a bit over.
Probably.
That's fine. This House accordingly invites the Deputy Prime Minister to make the second speech for the affirmative side. So here.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, I believe you are.
Okay. I'll time keep.
I'll keep the time. No, don't worry. It's fine.
Okay. So from starting in 3, 2, 1. From side opening government, we say that number 1, how instructions will be given, that instructions will be given faster under our world, and the instructions will reach the police officers faster, and it will lead to better law enforcement. And number 2, security always outweighs privacy. We are not going into the houses of the civilians anyway. It's better if they are freaking out rather if they're dead. And number 3, why funds will be worth it. Crimes will be much better investigated. You keep on saying that when we implement drones and all that, we're not when we support the use of drones, how we are not changing the situation. But you never completely explained how you improve the situation, how just adding a bunch of other CCTV cameras and how raising the pay of the police officers by a small margin is going to change the law enforcement situation dramatically. Like, you made such certain claims that under your world the situation is going to change, but never really showed how. Now it is so we have told you that the most important thing to us is the security of the civilians. Now it is the moral duty of the government to protect the civilians, and by implementing drones, the actual area that will be covered will be vast, and the information is going to reach the authorities and the police stations faster, and the information that is going to reach is going to be valuable. Now let's uh, let's um, let's give you an example. Like back in 2015, the incident that happened at TSC in Dhaka University, how that would have played out under our world. Now, under our world, the drones would have given the proper information to the authorities in time. The actual visuals would be given to the police officers, and they could know what exactly was going on. But under the status quo, what happened? There was a lot of misinformation that was being spread, and it took a lot of time for the police officers to know what exactly was happening. Under our world, that would not have happened. The information would have reached the authorities in time, and the situation could have been prevented by sending in the right people at the right time. And under your world, this would not have happened because you do not support air surveillance. Now, you've also said how there's this maintenance factor, and it's unpractical, and there would be a lot of funding would go into this drone and air surveillance, and it would be wasteful. The thing is that under your world, by adding a bunch of other CCTV cameras and by raising the pay of the police officers by a small margin, it is not going to make a dramatic difference. Rather, under our world, even if we are spending more money than side opposition, the trade-off will be that a lot of money is going to be spent in these ventures. It would pay out eventually because the information will be reaching the authorities in time, and the information that will be reaching the authorities in time will be useful. Now, you've said how racism will be persistent and racism will be propagated under our world, that the tools that the government is using will somehow be used against the state interest. Now, the thing is that under our model, we have clarified that the government will control all the eye in the sky policing, and that there would be no privately funded drones and no privately funded air surveillances, and the governments will be the ones who would take care of and the government will control all the surveillances, and that is why we believe that these technologies cannot be used against the state's interest. Now, taken.
We talk about how the government is infallible, but we still see the existence of WikiLeaks and government facts being outed. Why don't you think these footages can also be outed?
Yes, the government is in no way infallible, and these footages can be outed. But to prevent that, we will fund these ventures properly so that these situations do not happen, and the point in time that they do happen, it won't be that harmful because the police would be the law enforcement agencies would be doing their work, and the crime would be stopped by the point in time any possible harm could have been done. So yeah, we have shown to you how the security of the people happen to be the most important duty for the government, and how it is going to be effective, it is going to be legitimate, and how what the opposition, the things that the opposition brought up were mostly rebutted. And with that, I'd like to end my speech. So proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. By my stopwatch, it says 5 minutes 44 seconds, and this House cordially invites the second speaker of the opening opposition to make their case. So here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Could you boost your volume a bit? It's a bit difficult to hear.
Hello.
Yes, now it's loud and clear.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Understand, ladies and gentlemen, what are the things that side opposition wants to bring up to you? Ladies and gentlemen, we bring you 3 basic points. We tell you what's the problem with cost management. Secondly, we tell you what are the problems if we introduce drone in terms of accidents and collateral damages. And thirdly, why the main difference between CCTV cameras and perhaps eye in the sky is mobility, and why this mobility is bad itself. Before explaining this, I would first like to rebut whatever the side proposition has said. Their first and main argument was to increase the security in urban life. Understand, ladies and gentlemen, even if you increase drones and whatever they're talking about, eye in the sky, like my first speaker said, eventually you're going to need ground troops. Understand, ladies and gentlemen, why implementing more and more eye in the sky is detrimental for ground troops. Understand, drones and helicopters don't come at the same cost as these ground troops. They usually tend to cost more. In such cases, in most cases, what we see is that government seeks private funding. We believe that if there is a sort of private funding, then it might be problematic. But like proposition said, they don't like to characterize it in a private funding way. They say it's going to be state funded. Even if it's state funded, it means that more and more money is going to be extracted from individual taxpayers. And furthermore, even if taxpayers are not able to meet up the demand, what's going to happen is they're going to reduce the amount of money that they have allocated for ground troops and is going to implement it for maintenance and creation of such eye in the sky projects. We believe that this is problematic because already the crime situation is worse, because there is underfunded police officers, there is not enough law enforcement agency, they do not have enough technologies to help them. Furthermore, if you even reduce their funds up to an even further extent, it's gonna mean that the number of ground troops are gonna reduce even further on. Understand now why ground troops are very much essential for the state's crime, for the reducing state's crime rate. Understand that even if you see images of it, understand in order to tackle certain terrorism, you're gonna need manpower ultimately. Understand that not taken such. Understand without proper manpower, even you have the certain amount of information, you cannot take direct actions, ladies and gentlemen. Understand action is something which comes with ground power, which comes with ground police working for you. Understand that this sort of idea that today proposition brings up is only going to convey you information, but the people who are going to work according to that information is going to be your ground troops. And we believe such costly project which has a very good chances of reducing ground police's fund is something certainly opposition cannot opt to. Moving on. Understand why we talk about cost management. Something that my prime minister has something my prime minister has been talking about almost a lot of about his speech time. Understand that why is it essential, ladies and gentlemen. Something that I talked about. Understand in terms of drones. Understand drones inherently cost more. Furthermore, the people who operate drones, they also cost more, and also the maintenance cost of drones is far more than the police officer. Understand this could mean the terrible harms that I talked about earlier. Understand this chain is gonna ultimately affect the taxpayers, which is gonna be detrimental for them. Point number two, which I mentioned earlier, was accidents and collateral damage. Now, what do I mean by this? Understand that when you're using CCTV footages, there is no actually you're getting that amount of surveillance that you need. Furthermore,
Point of information.
what happens in case of drones and other eye in the sky projects is that even as think that there is as assume that there is an accident, ladies and gentlemen, that causes more damage compared to a CCTV. It's far more safe than compared to whatever the accidents can cause. Before moving forward, yes, sir, your question, sir.
Given the broad initial support for the war on terror, do you think taxpayers have significant backlash against funds that are used for security purposes?
Could you repeat it?
Do you think given the broad initial support for the war on terror, which was done for the security of Americans, do you think taxpayers often think that funds used for security are misallocated and have backlash for it?
Understand, ladies and gentlemen, what today we talk about. The question was that the people won't necessarily have any complaints against providing funds for these big projects. Understand, ladies and gentlemen, when you can run the same project with lesser cost management, understand when you can provide the same facility, when you can provide almost the same facilities by increasing your ground troops and having more facilities over there, understand in a world where you can do the same project with lesser chances of collateral damages if any source of accidents takes place, I believe that the option of people opting for this certain projects is going to deteriorate at the very first place. Ladies and gentlemen, when you as a government tell to the people every time that look, drones are the ultimate solution, we cannot do anything but drones, people are definitely going to have no sorts of objection against it. Understand that the society that the people have created in current world, such as the United States, where they over glorify drones, understand these sort of events can occur, but if you can show them the feasibility and show the implementation of ground troops, how it is effective for the people, you can also get the same results, and people would start opting for it, and people would start to see the reason why objecting against drones is necessary. Moving on, the final argument, what is it? Understand why mobility is a problem. Understand when mobility is given to the certain police officers, ladies and gentlemen, what happens is that they're going to use that mobility to track down only certain sort of people. Understand, in a world of constant racism and discrimination, if this sort of mobility is given to the police, it's highly likely that they would track certain discriminated groups. They would track down only those certain few minority of people who they feel are wrong. Suppose in a country like United States, they would only make surveillance against immigrants, or suppose black people, because understand they have an inherent hate for them, ladies and gentlemen. Understand, we believe we don't want to give this mobility to the people. Understand that there are other alternatives available. We don't want to opt for such an expensive solution. We believe that is why we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
Around it's 10 seconds. This House cordially invites the closing government's first speaker to make their case. You're here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, give me 10 seconds to organize now.
Sure thing.
Okay, yes. Yeah, can I start? Hello, can I start?
You can start.
Yeah, starting in 3, 2, 1. If their idea is we are just going to continue to do the same project, the same funds under a similar approach, and somehow that's going to magically work out, that's the worst form of idealistic case that we have ever seen. Considering that for decades without an end, we have seen how aggressive policing in these communities have not only segregated these communities to a massive extent, but also has never been effective in bringing about the type of change through the reduction of crimes that we think has never happened. We think it was there, but show us some side opening opposition as to why current policies, considering how they've continuously failed, are somehow thing that's going to follow, somehow that's going to work out if you follow a similar approach. 3 responses to their side. First, the issue about funding. Arshiyan comes up and tells us that, look, it's going to cost more, and somehow we're going to take away the funds from one part of the police force and going to take it to another. Absolutely false. We think, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why you put funds into the police force is because you want to strengthen the police force. We don't think we're going to take away funds from the other parts of the police force to fund this type of thing. It's mostly going to be, we are just going to increase the budget for that type police force from discretionary spending and going to ensure that the police force gets more money. It doesn't have to be a reallocation within the police force. But secondly, the idea about how that's going to lead to backlash from people. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that if we really need to raise funds through tax, that there will be extremely little backlash, considering that security is one of the more things that people can empathize better with. Something that Zaid clearly shows to you why in the case of the war on terror, it has so little backlash, because people in the name of security are much more likely to give that money because that's something they care about a lot. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, the idea about racial profiling. We don't think, ladies and gentlemen, we are for racial profiling. Not sure why these people will follow particularly black individuals anyway, and that's an idea that clearly doesn't make much sense. But thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, we don't even think this debate is about finance. I think it's a given fiat of the motion that we can financially do this, that we can financially maintain these drones. We think what they needed to do was engage as to why doing this wouldn't be effective in stopping crime, considering the massive amounts of crime that happens. But thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, we also don't think it's a burden to show you that every single crime that's happening is going to be something that's going to be caught by the drones in itself. As long as we can show you that we are much more effective in dealing with crime, we will be able to solve that issue. What do I going to talk to you before moving on to my constructive master? We think that the type of debate that they had in the upper house completely missed the point. We don't think the debate is about a lack of law enforcement, like lack of law enforcement and lack of police ground forces, like OJ and O like you to think. But we think the problem is a significantly excessive presence of law enforcement in these communities that tends to be a massive problem. Why so? We think, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, on my first point of constructive and unique analysis, the lack of cooperation with the type of police force is the exact reason. We think the lack of cooperation in this type of communities exists because of the type of aggressive policing that we have right now. We think, ladies and gentlemen, in places like this with a very high crime rate, with a high police presence, their presence itself is seen as extremely confrontational, where these police have to go in with a lack of prior knowledge about what's happening, and it's often seen as a very confrontational approach, because there are police in those communities which have a massive amounts of presence. They have a massive amount of presence on the streets, they have a massive amount of presence on the corners, they have a massive amount of presence in those type of communities. We think the more you are uninformed, the more you end up busting into homes without information, and the more likely you're going to aggressively deal with it. And the more likely these people end up being less cooperative with you. We think it's a self-perpetuating cycle. I don't think that's wrong. We think that it's important that these people in this type of communities feel less hostile towards police and understand that we are there to help them, instead of trying to aggressively crash their door downs and try to intervene in their lives and try to destroy everything that they have. We don't think that's what we're trying to do, but that's often the perception that they get. It's the type of policing that happens under the status quo, where we don't often have the type of information necessary to go into these communities and do what's necessary, because these people often end up as being uncooperative, because guess what, they think we're an external threat to them. We think it's a self-perpetuating cycle where these people tend to be uncooperative because we are perceived as a threat, and because they're uncooperative, oftentimes we take that aggressive approach. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that's something that needs to be solved. That is the status quo. We think, ladies and gentlemen, we are the ones who change that, because we go into these communities and we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to crash the doors down, but rather we're going to go in and collect information and extract information through drones and whatnot. We don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that privacy is the main issue here, because we think privacy gets lost under both models. The fact that you charge in with a warrant is a breach of privacy anyway. It's just that you'd rather do it with a warrant, or are you going to do it with a tiny small piece of drone. But we think that privacy actually gets protected better when you act and go into a community with a warrant only when you have sufficient information, as compared to going in with warrants and barging into doors in an attempt to extract information, because guess what, those communities were not being cooperative in the first place. We think we show you why these communities are going to be much more cooperative, because it's a comparative to what the status quo is. The status quo that opening opposition never showed us any reason to defend. We think that status quo, which has an extremely aggressive and hostile approach, is something that needs to change, and that's the only moment of time these people are going to be more cooperative to us. But even if somehow it gets
Point of information.
we think, ladies and gentlemen, we're willing to ensure that we are willing to rather go with security rather than protecting a certain amount of privacy. Yeah, suddenly.
Right. So, assuming you have information regarding where a crime is going on, you still go in there to confront those individuals. Why did this confrontational interaction change?
We think, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, you obviously do to confront that individual, but under our model, we think that the confrontation only happens because you only go into those type of communities with your ground troops. The only moment of time you have sufficient information to understand or think that a threat in that particular community exists, as opposed to what happens right now, where you go in the first place because of lack of cooperation, and you go in an attempt to extract information. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we think this is extremely, why is it something that's going to be extremely effective? Because we think, because of the nature of how urbanized and congested these communities are usually, ground surveillance and ground troops tend to be extremely ineffective because of how blocked off your access is. Because we think in those type of communities, it's extremely hard to get effective surveillance or information out through mainly ground troops or ground surveillance. Where aerial surveillance as an extremely effective tool to our toolbox of weapons to deal with crime. We think they're undetectable. You don't always signal to the criminals that you're coming in before you do. It's not often as intrusive. And even if they can't cover everything, we think, ladies and gentlemen, they're much more effective than the type of policies that are catered to right now. We need to engage through why the status quo is something that's justified, but more importantly, they need to tell us, ladies and gentlemen, why this will not bring about an added benefit in these communities. Thank you.
Fardeen, are you done? Right. Your speech was approximately 7 minutes, 20 seconds. And this House cordially invites the first speaker of the closing opposition to make their negative case. Here.
Yeah. Albert, can you hear me? Let's be very clear. This is what the world looks like. There are helicopters constantly roaming above your head. Probably their objective is to micromanage everything that is going on, looking at people mostly as criminals and people they suspect. Second, these are the places, most likely the urban areas that we're talking about, crime rates aren't hit and miss from the criminal organizations, but are probably persistent for quite some time, and they are organized in their nature. So these aren't the types of crimes, let's say, just theft and robbery that happens on the street that you can directly see and surveil, but these are persisting problems ingrained in those places because of the power structures that have been developed. In my speech, I will engage with the proposition models, the model that we got from both sides, from the both houses. Second, I will talk about why they aren't essentially effective. And finally, exclusive contribution as to how Eye in the Sky permanently damages the transition process of these societies. First, the possible analysis that we get from government sides is that because the war on terror, everything is great and we have so much money that you can simply throw money around everywhere whenever we feel that some policy will be great because it's technologically savvy. The problem is, after Iraq, after Afghanistan, war on terror isn't the most lucrative idea in itself. But even if it were, the police still doesn't have infinite amount of budget that they can allocate everywhere. That means unless you accept the trade-off that aggressively investing in um, eye in the sky policy will reduce investments in ground troops, we don't think we have a debate in our hand. Second of all, the presence, whether the presence is confrontational or not, and I think this is the biggest clash of this debate so far. Let's analyze this. First, if you tell me that presence is something that is reduced because presence of ground troops is reduced, that means you are having a flawed premise of this debate, because presence above your head has to be considered as a solid active presence as well for this debate to take place. That means in our world, we are telling you that presence on the ground is better. Similarly, you have to tell me aggressive presence on the sky is better. It's not presence on the ground versus no presence in this debate. Second of all, as given presence exists in both worlds, why do we think presence on the ground is far better? And listen to this very carefully. Let's understand how these places work and how helicopters work. The first problem with helicopters is they can't land everywhere. And that is the first problem that you have. They will mostly operate from the sky. Second of all, drones are like CCTVs, and they're probably like everywhere. So you have 50 monitors work in front of you operating at this point in time with not enough forces to go everywhere. But let's assume there are enough forces. So these are the two biggest problems currently we have. What is the impact of this? Both these things existing on the sky level has one of the biggest problems ever, and it links back to the characterization that we have given you as to how these high crime rate areas, in these high crime rate urban areas, crimes aren't hit and miss or like active ongoing crimes, but something that are persistent and ingrained. In your best case, what you will be able to do is, if there is a theft, direct theft occurring right now, you can take CCTV footages of the theft and inform the police station about it. If there is an ongoing murder attempt, in the best possible case, you will be able to inform the police station and ask them to come and quickly save these people. But that is to say, these things can still happen with the existing status quo that we have currently, like CCTV forces, CCTV cameras on the ground, and police forces on localities, and obviously a working 911 that neighbors can call and call the police at this point in time. So what is the bigger problem that you create? The bigger problem that you create is, in these areas, problems are when individuals are under pressure to give money to gangs. Individuals are forced to stay silent and not speak out against the violent gangs more often than not. That means in these places, the crimes are very institutional and ingrained. That means in a lot of cases, there wouldn't be a direct murder, there wouldn't be direct robbery, but people willingly giving this money to the gangs because they don't have another alternative, because there's an alternative existing on the ground. When there's an aggressive police force existing in the ground, police always evaluates the possibility of human mobility in that particular place. Whether that means whether a police force can move into these areas, whether it is risky enough for human forces to enter. That is when police forces create a long-term change and a sustainable model in these places. For example, actively interrogating people, evaluating crime rates of past crime rates of people living in those areas, in order to make sure these places are more safe more often than not. We think that human element is far better if troops are on the ground. Finally, why this creates a permanent damage in the transition process? First, in places where you have this kind of policies, we think politicians exploit in their mandates. What does this mean? This means since you are capitalizing on people's desperation to get security, and you have a very eye candy-ish type of solution where helicopters are roaming all over your head, politicians are more likely to propose populist ideas in these places where you want to have more drones and helicopters above your head. That means in the long run, where you are supposed to have a transition to a more livable society, what will happen is the absolute rich will move out of these places, and the absolute poor, or the people of color in dominant white areas, will end up living in fear. your economic institutions wouldn't want to exist in these places because these aren't very employee favorable places in the first place. Your good schools and universities would like to avoid this place because, and at the end of the day, it stifles the development of these places more often than not. Look, evidence and gathering evidence is not the problem of this debate, because those evidence one way or the other. But if it stifles the development of these places because this place looks risky in general, if these evidences cannot be used because you can only target a few visible crimes and don't target the ingrained problems of the society, we think you make things far worse and stifle the transition. We should win.
Just a bit above 7 minutes. This House cordially invites the second speaker and the last speaker of the government side to make their case.
Give me 30 seconds. Need to arrange for notes.
That's all good.
Hello, Zaid.
All right. Turning timer on. Also. Okay. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So understand before I begin my speech the absolute strawmanning coming from Shadman in his debate. He comes in and says, we think we have loads of money simply because we were able to fund the war on terror, and that obviously means we have lots of money to spare. That wasn't our point. Our point was engaging with the opening opposition, which said that taxpayers will have a huge amount of backlash whenever funds are taken from them. No, we don't think all types of funds and usage of funds always cause backlash. In socialist states, having funds for welfare never causes backlash. When in many countries where there are high crime rates, people really empathize with the concept of security and are very willing to fund those in every instances. And this is why we feel it's very important for Wasif to come up and engage with this, because the whole premise of closing opposition's case is based on a trade-off they never justified must necessarily happen. The trade-off is you're going to have more of these drones and you're going to necessarily have less of police forces. We told you from Fardeen's speech onwards that we don't necessarily think simply because you want to increase funding for a certain sector of the police force, you must necessarily decrease funding in other sectors of the police force. We think there's a lot of discretionary spending that the government has liberty to use wherever it wants. We don't necessarily think it must come at the cost of another. So they must justify this premise. Secondly, even if it comes to a problem in finances, we don't support the rollback of all police force. We think you can increase funds by taxation or increase it for that reason, and we don't think there's going to be significant backlash for it. So a large part of the premise of the closing opposition simply does not stand in the world that the government is trying to envision, and they have never justified why. So in my debate, there's going to be 3 main clashes. First of all, the principle. Second of all, confrontation, and whether or not that's going to always happen, and whether or not that's always going to be aggressive. And finally, the human element, which Shadman talks about in their extension. First of all, on the principle, they said principally everyone has a right to privacy. Here, Fardeen engaged, and there was no defense coming from either side of the opposition. We said that oftentimes you have warrants which infringe on the privacy of people, and we think that's justified. Why? Because the increase in security caused by this invasion of privacy is something that we value as a society. We tell you in high crime areas, we think it's necessary to do this because other methods and the status quo that they're defending has not worked, which is why there are high crime. We think there's a very urgent need for a change in the process that we use, and this is a good thing. Is justified because of the increase in security it causes. So beyond this, the privacy point did not develop, and it was a principle that was dropped by the opposition side. Secondly, about confrontation. The closing opposition comes up and says, you know, presence exists in both worlds. One is ground presence, the other is aerial presence. tell you that no, the presence is very distinctly different. The presence and the problem with presence that the government identified from Fardeen onwards is that it causes a lot of confrontation, it causes a lot of anger between the community and the surveying party. This is solved when the objects that are surveilling you are so small and are drones which are so silent and have surveilling capacities like infrared detection, which don't necessarily need you invading a house. We tell you in those instances the presence is very different. In these instances, there is no confrontation, there is no anger, there is no distrust of the police force because they don't seem to be budging into their lives. So the presence is very distinctly different. Secondly,
Zaid, POI.
no, thank you. They said a very odd point about you have 50 monitors, so you can't possibly know everything that's going on. We tell you, no, if you believe CCTV works, which is something that you guys are fine with, that's when you have 50 monitors and you don't have a problem with that. We tell you in instances where you're driving a drone, there's a manpower sitting in station who's driving that drone and knows exactly what he's seeing. A lot of benefits that I'm going to talk about in the clash about human elephants are already accrued in using a drone which has significant capabilities, as we believe the government is going to deploy. Secondly, we tell you, even if there is a rollback of the police force, we don't think there is necessarily a need for a large amount of ground forces if you have these drones. We tell you why is that? Because a large part of the ground forces are spent and they're utilized in having patrols around town, in posting them in loads of stations so that there's always access to them. We tell you, you no longer need these people because you have drones to replace them. When you need some sort of intervention, you can call in people from your station so that they can intervene. We think that kind of relaying of information already happens with the drone, so this process is not so we think confrontation is very distinctly different, and as a result, you're going to have much more peace. And that was the premise of a large part of our argumentation, which ends up standing, because we told you that the large reason for a lack of cooperation, which is intrinsically important in these kinds of communities. Why is that? Because oftentimes when you have high crime communities, loads of your neighbors are criminals, loads of your family members are criminals, and loads of people in your acquaintances are criminals. You have a tightly connected network, as Shadman correctly identifies. But why is it that a network that everyone seems to know is never caught by the police? It's because no one decides to talk to the police, no one decides to cooperate with the police. The problem with this is because they think that the police are invading their community, the police are barging in with warrants without any significant proof. We tell you, when you decrease the amount of confrontational aspect of these kinds of interventions, you have large amount of cooperation. And this means you, in many instances, you're going to have more privacy. Why is that? Because oftentimes you're going to have to barge into a house anyway to find out whether or not they're doing illegal activities because you've got tips saying that they're doing it. Oftentimes when you don't have a large amount of cooperation from the public, you don't necessarily always know whether or not you're right. We tell you when, so you have greater instances of illegitimate breaches of privacy where you have warrants and going into areas which no longer do not have any criminal activity going on. When you have larger amount of cooperation, you're more likely to have these people who are going to be informed better and are only going to enter in instances where the breach of privacy is legitimate. I think that's a great benefit for our side. So confrontation is going to stand, and the benefits that accrue from it because of a lack of rebuttals from Shadman are going to stand as well. Finally, the human element. Shadman comes and talks about how necessarily, since you're going to lose on ground truths, which we never conceded, we never think you need to lose out on ground truths. But even if we do, he said the human element is very important for two reasons. You can see the geographical limitations of that place, and that allows you to plan attacks or infiltrations. Or secondly, you can interrogate people. We don't think your interrogation is exclusive to your world. We think we do have ground troops in our world, and interrogation can happen for people you've correctly identified through cooperation from the public as being criminal themselves. The kind of human element, and the fact that you can see is something, no thank you, is going to happen anyway last minute, is because you have those drones who have incredibly capable. So we don't see the exclusive benefit of a human element. The structural problems that they say will never be addressed because you're addressing only the problem is something we don't believe. We don't think they're justified. Why we will not take any measures. Problems, we think the human element is likely to be that you're going to be armed to the teeth because you're unsure about whether or not there's a drug gang standing behind that door. So when you bust in, even if it's innocent people, you're going to be much more trigger happy. That human element finally is given away. We think human element falls cleanly to our side because we were able to show we're okay on the principle that confrontation is less violent, and finally the human element is unnecessary or can be emulated by drones. We win this debate. Thank you.
Around 7 minutes, 28 seconds, I believe. This House cordially invites the last speaker of the opposition, the second speaker of the closing government here. I mean,
Yeah, can I get 30 seconds to organize my notes?
yeah, sure.
Thank you. Okay, I'm about to start.
Ready when you're.
We think when there is a structural crime problem within your area, the solution is to ensure there is a constructive ground-up rebuild of forces, as opposed to a facade of protection from far in the air. In my speech, there are three elements. First, to discuss which side has a more effective policy of dealing with crime within these areas. Secondly, is to show how long-term improvement of crime happens within these areas. And thirdly, in impacts on people regarding privacy. On the first, we think closing government mainly engaged to this area to say that the bigger problem in society is that there are too many police, which is to say that there is too much of a police presence. Their solution to this problem somehow was to add drones and now look at every single individual as criminals. We think that in itself counterintuitively falls as not reducing fear on individuals. Why was this problematic? And their analysis really highlights this clearly. We think the types of analysis they bring are very one-sided. For instance, the only instance where they have cooperation with individuals is when people are barging into the houses. We think rather most crimes in these areas occur within the corners and alleyways within streets where you can operate with less information anyway. We think that's the first thing you need to keep in mind. So as to say that cooperation only arises when you stop barging into people's houses is not a legitimate or majority of circumstances. Secondly, the benefit of drones is visibility is a bit more, because they point out you need to still urgently go on and comprehend individuals and try to solve the crime. The only advantage is there is certainly a certain more visibility, not extensive knowledge on what is going on, which is to say, if you want to barge into a house, you cannot look into a house even under government's world, which means that these instances don't change. The visibility which you obtain by a drone can be obtained by individuals by more ground troops on the ground level. We don't think that is unique benefit on their side. The final benefit that closing government gives you in terms of solving crimes is to show that there is less scope of hiding your crimes. We think even within our world, the incentive to hide crimes remain. Certain more individuals will take more difficult measures to ensure they are not caught. We don't think that is a massive benefit they extend on sufficiently. But all of this is extremely problematic because of less benefits, because you're likely to worsen the police. Why was this characterization under our world actually true? We think to a large extent, the reason for you to improve the police force is what Shadman talked to you. Demand to ground up improve that particular society, which means if you have a certain amount of political capital, can someone please give me a time count? When you have a certain amount of political capital, we think it is unlikely you can do each and everything within that region. Yeah, Abrar.
2 minutes, 50 seconds.
Okay. Right. So why was this important? Because we talked to you in the previous speech about how there is already a bias against putting in extensive funding for things like the war on terror. You cannot magically get a lot of benefit. This analysis was not taken away by Zaid today, because we think that the cost that is actually incurred from such a massive technological improvement is quite sufficient in response to that. But why was this important? Secondly, on our side of the house, and why was the alternative better? Because of the characterization of crime Shadman gives to you and how entrenched it is. Why is this important to solve? Because the first three ways to solve this essentially. First, it is to control the bias and improve comprehensive equipment of the police. Secondly, is to ensure the police have an incentive to care, and third is to ensure there is more troops available. We think you create a shortage of troops under government's world. Secondly, we think you reduce the scope of better equipment. Why is equipment important here in particular? Because we think a lot of the harms of a large presence of police is directly a result of police being unchecked and less regulated, which still exists under their side, even if there is surveillance. So we think think that harm still exists. But secondly, we think the incentive to properly enforce law is entirely dependent on police having an incentive to do so. We think they don't have that because they don't have incremental changes in wages of individuals. We put that. These three solutions show you why, uniquely from closing opposition, we give you reasons as to why the status quo is improving and can improve better on the ground, uniquely to deal with the crimes which are extremely difficult to approach under their world. We think that is something you should note in judging the first clash as to which side has a better solution. On the second of improvement, we think their side has no argument regarding this except for the fact that there might be cooperation, extremely presumptuous basis of that. What do we put to you? There are two ways to improve the conditions. First, by funding, and second, by transition of the state into a better area. Why was this extremely important? Because we showed to you that any scope of political change within this area is extremely populist, which is to say that individuals are okay and more happy to some extent when you have a flashy policy like eye in the eye of the sky. But what do you lose out on this policy? You essentially create a state of emergency and extreme hostility, that it is riddled with violence and there is no solution to this endless hell. Why is this problematic? Because it automatically drives out individuals who successively progress economically in these regions. It denies access to FDI within these regions, so there is less scope of structural improvements. Thirdly, there is no one to pressurize the state to change things because those with political capital leave. No engagement from closing government on these three very important issues we bring to you. But what is the comparative? We think that on a further level, we show you that individuals in these regions at least have some reason to stay under our world because they don't think it is hell under our world, and they have certain attachments which at this point become more important to them than when they are living in hell. We think on the comparative we have some improvement. Why do they worsen it? Because essentially the state reaches its capacity of political change within an area when they opt for this policy as opposed to better structural improvement, which is to say improve education, improve the police force, general training, and more accountability for racism. We think these are the things closing government and government in general lose out on. On a comparative, we show you that the world is essentially... No, thank you. We think on the comparative, our world is actually much better because you can actually have structural improvement A and B, more effective solution to crimes. At this point, we already win the major issue on effectiveness, and we win the major issue on how these areas will improve better. But what do we add to that? And we think we also win the debate over other sides because better than OO, we put to a more realistic characterization of the areas in which these crimes operate. Better than OG, whose only argument was investigation, we show you ground up improvement. But the final area to discuss is regarding discomfort of individuals. Their analysis of these people not being tormented and things like warrants are essentially one-off incidents. However, what you have to suffer as a harm on privacy under their world is that the police is still biased. The people, like the colored individuals within society, still know that and still fear that. The problem is, now there is no place that you can ever escape from them. Specifically for those who have been tormented and are in extreme paranoia, you put them under even less freedom. The argument of privacy is better dealt with by closing opposition because we issue the exact nuance which makes the life of the most vulnerable individuals within these areas much more hellish, and we think is the last minute. And we think that is a far worse world, even when it comes down to privacy. On three grounds, closing opposition wins this debate to show we have more effective police, we have a better police, and we have more people who are free and who have some liberty. Very proud to oppose.
Around 7 minutes, 24 seconds, here.
Hello.
I'm just going to take some time to go through my notes. And
Hello.
You can drop the call, Abrar, and then come back later. I'll stop the broadcast for now.
All right, thanks.
All right.